The viewing gallery of Station Harmony buzzed with excited chatter, as delegates from across the galaxy admired each other's companion animals. Soft chirps, gentle purrs, and melodic hums filled the air while families gathered around display platforms to see creatures from distant worlds. The annual Unity Festival had become the most anticipated event in the diplomatic calendar, where species showcased not just their technology or culture, but the bonds they formed with other living beings. Counselor Vren watched from his elevated position as a Quillen child giggled at a floating bubble creature that changed colors with each laugh. The translucent being bobbed harmlessly through the air, leaving trails of sparkling mist that smelled like flowers. Nearby, a Draxian family demonstrated their crystalline beetles, which crawled across their arms and created intricate light patterns that danced across the polished floor. Every creature present had been bred for generations to be perfectly docile, incapable of aggression, and safe around even the smallest children. The festival represented everything the Galactic Council valued: peace, harmony, the triumph of civilization over the brutal violence of natural selection. Each species had taken their companion animals and refined them through careful breeding, until only the gentlest traits remained. Vren felt pride swell in his chest as he observed the scene. This was what separated civilized beings from the savage animals of primitive worlds. Coordinator Plin approached Vren with a data pad, his six-legged form moving with practiced grace across the platform. The Urian official's fluffy exterior rippled with pleasure as he gestured toward the crowd below. His own companion, a rabbit-sized creature named Pip, nestled in a special carrier against his side. Pip's large eyes blinked slowly, content and calm as always. The attendance numbers exceed last year by 18%, Plin said, his voice carrying the musical quality typical of his species. We have representatives from 42 worlds. The younglings especially seem engaged with the interactive displays. Vren nodded approvingly. And the new species? The humans? Have they arrived yet? Plin's expression shifted slightly, uncertainty crossing his features. Their shuttle docked approximately 10 minutes ago. They are proceeding through customs now. I must admit, Counselor, I am curious about their companion choice. The documentation they submitted was somewhat vague. Vague how? They simply listed the species as canine and noted it has been domesticated for over 15,000 years. The name they use is dog, but they provided no genetic profile or behavioral assessment. I assumed it was an oversight in translation. Before Vren could respond, an alarm chimed softly in his earpiece. Security protocol. He tapped the communication device and heard the strained voice of Chief Security Officer Dalvin. Counselor, we have a situation at Docking Bay 7. The human delegation. You need to see this. Vren exchanged a glance with Plin before both of them activated their personal viewing screens. The security feed from the docking bay appeared, showing the arrival corridor where new visitors typically waited for clearance. A human woman stood at the center of the frame, dressed in formal diplomatic attire. She appeared relaxed, even smiling as she reviewed something on her data device. Then Vren saw what walked beside her. The creature stood nearly as tall as the human's waist, its body covered in black and tan fur that rippled over clearly defined muscles. 4 powerful legs supported a frame built for running, for chasing, for hunting. Its head was broad with a long snout, and when it turned to look at something off-screen, Vren glimpsed rows of sharp white teeth. The ears stood erect and alert, constantly moving to track sounds. But worst of all were the eyes. They held an intelligence that Vren recognized immediately. Predator intelligence. The creature was not just an animal. It was a hunter. By the void, Plin whispered beside him. Is that what humans consider a companion? The human woman held a simple braided rope attached to a collar around the creature's neck. As they watched, she spoke to the animal and it sat immediately, its attention focused entirely on her. The tail moved slightly, brushing the floor, but otherwise the creature remained perfectly still, waiting, watching. Security personnel began to gather at a distance, clearly uncertain how to proceed. The predator awareness systems throughout that section of the station flashed warnings, identifying the creature as a potential threat. Vren could see the classification scrolling across his screen. Apex predator, pack hunter, bite force capable of crushing bone, speed sufficient to run down prey over long distances. Contact the human immediately, Vren ordered. That creature cannot be permitted into the festival. But, Counselor, Plynn protested weakly. She has submitted all the proper diplomatic credentials. The humans are new members of the council. We cannot simply refuse their entry without cause. Look at that thing, Vren said, his voice hard. It is a weapon with fur. Those teeth were designed to tear flesh. Those eyes mark it as a hunter. Would you want that creature near your Pip? Near the younglings playing in the gallery? Plynn clutched his carrier closer, and Pip sensed the distress, making a small worried sound. No, the coordinator admitted. But what do we tell them? How do we explain that their idea of companionship is horrifying to us? Vren straightened his uniform. We tell them the truth. That creature represents everything civilized species have evolved beyond. We chose companions that embody peace and gentleness. They apparently chose to leash a nightmare and call it a friend. He started toward the exit, Plynn hurrying behind him. As they left the viewing gallery, neither noticed several other delegates who had also accessed the security feeds. Word was already spreading through the festival. The humans had arrived, and they had brought something terrible with them. In the docking bay, Beth Carver scratched behind Kodiak's ears and smiled down at her dog. He looked up at her with complete trust and devotion, tail wagging slowly. She had no idea that above her, an entire space station full of aliens was staring at her best friend with fear and disgust. The Unity Festival was about to become much more complicated. Beth noticed the security officers keeping their distance, hands hovering near weapons they probably hoped they would not need to use. She had dealt with nervous officials before during first contact situations, but this felt different. These aliens looked genuinely frightened, and she could not understand why. Kodiak sat perfectly still beside her, his training keeping him calm despite the unusual environment and strange scents. Ambassador Carver? A voice called from behind the security line. Two figures approached slowly, one tall and thin with pale blue skin, the other shorter and covered in silvery fur. Both kept their eyes fixed on Kodiak. I am Counselor Vren, and this is Coordinator Plynn. We oversee the Unity Festival. There appears to be a misunderstanding regarding your companion. Beth stood and offered her hand in greeting before remembering that humans were one of the few species who used that gesture. She lowered it awkwardly. I apologize for any confusion. This is Kodiak. He is a German Shepherd, a type of dog. All his vaccination records and behavioral certifications are in the documentation I submitted last month. Vren exchanged a glance with Plynn. Yes, we received those files. However, I do not think you understand our concern. Your companion is a predator. An apex predator from what our scans indicate. We cannot allow such a creature into a festival where families and younglings gather. A predator? Beth looked down at Kodiak, who gazed back at her with his mouth open in what she recognized as a relaxed expression. To her, he looked friendly and calm. Well, yes, technically dogs descended from wolves, but they have been domesticated for over 15,000 years. Kodiak is trained and certified for diplomatic functions. He has been in crowded public spaces hundreds of times. Plynn shifted uncomfortably. Ambassador, perhaps on your world this seems normal, but to us what you describe is incomprehensible. You took a hunting animal, a killer, and decided to keep it as a companion. Why would any species do this? Beth felt her patience beginning to wear thin. Because dogs are loyal, intelligent, and protective. They are not killers. They are friends, partners. My species and theirs evolved together. We helped each other survive. Survive, Vren repeated, latching onto the word. Yes, that makes sense now. We reviewed Earth's classification after seeing the security footage. Your world is rated as a Class 4 death world. The Council approved humanity's membership application, but clearly some details were not given proper attention. You come from a place of violence and danger, so you formed bonds with violent and dangerous creatures. The accusation in his tone sparked anger in Beth's chest. Earth is challenging, yes, but that does not make us or our animals evil. Kodiak has never hurt anyone. He would not hurt anyone unless I was in danger and he was protecting me. Protecting, Plynn said softly, testing the word. But protection requires the capacity for violence, does it not? Your creature could tear my Pip apart in seconds if it chose to. Beth opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She looked at Kodiak again, trying to see him through alien eyes. His teeth were sharp. His jaws were strong. He weighed 35 kilograms of muscle and bone. Everything about him was designed for hunting. To someone who had never known predators except as threats, he must look terrifying. You are right, she admitted quietly. Kodiak could be dangerous if he wanted to be. But he does not want to be. That is the point. Dogs chose to live with humans thousands of years ago. We did not force them. They saw something in us and we saw something in them. Trust, friendship. They gave up their wild nature to be part of our families, and we gave them our protection and care in return. A nice story, Vren said, though his tone suggested he did not believe it. But we cannot risk the safety of festival attendees based on stories. I am sorry, Ambassador, but your companion cannot be permitted into the main areas. However, we can offer a compromise. There are secure observation rooms on level 3. Your creature can stay there with full monitoring and comfort amenities. You may visit him as often as you wish during your stay. Beth wanted to refuse. The idea of locking Kodiak away like he was some kind of monster made her furious. But she also understood that she was a guest here, representing her entire species. Causing a diplomatic incident over this would not help humanity's standing with the Galactic Council. Fine, she said, keeping her voice level. But I want it noted in the official record that I protest this decision. Kodiak is not a threat, and treating him like one is based on prejudice, not fact. Plynn flinched at the word prejudice, but Vren simply nodded. Your objection will be recorded. Please follow me. They walked through the corridors of Station Harmony, and Beth noticed how other aliens reacted as they passed. Parents pulled their children behind them. Delegates stepped into side passages to avoid getting close. Everyone stared at Kodiak with wide eyes and tense postures. Some whispered to each other, and Beth caught fragments of their conversations through her translator. Look at its teeth. Why would they keep such a thing? Deathworlders are insane. Kodiak remained calm through all of it, walking at Beth's side with his head up and ears forward. He was alert to the new environment but showed no signs of aggression or fear. His tail wagged occasionally when he saw something interesting, and once he paused to sniff at a strange plant growing in a decorative container. Beth had to tug gently on his leash to keep him moving. The observation room turned out to be a small space with transparent walls on 3 sides. Comfortable padding covered the floor, and there were food and water dispensers along one wall. It was clean and well-maintained, but it was still essentially a cage. Beth knelt beside Kodiak and removed his leash. Stay, she commanded softly. I will be back soon. Kodiak licked her hand and settled onto the padding, resting his head on his paws. He looked at her with patient eyes, trusting that she knew what she was doing. As Beth left, she glanced back to see a crowd already forming outside the observation room. Aliens pressed close to the transparent walls, staring at Kodiak like he was an exhibit in a zoo. Her dog ignored them, his eyes focused only on the door where his human had disappeared. She had come to the Unity Festival hoping to build bridges between species. Instead, she had accidentally revealed just how different humans were from the rest of the galaxy. 2 days passed with uncomfortable tension hanging over the Unity Festival. Beth attended the required diplomatic functions and smiled politely, while other delegates showed off their gentle companion creatures. She listened to speeches about harmony and civilization, while knowing that her best friend sat alone in a room being gawked at like a dangerous monster. Every few hours she would excuse herself and visit Kodiak, who always greeted her with the same patient devotion. On the 3rd morning, Beth woke to alarms blaring through her quarters. Emergency protocols activated automatically, and her communication panel lit up with priority messages. She dressed quickly and rushed into the corridor, where other confused delegates were emerging from their rooms. What is happening? She called to a passing Quillen official. Accident in the lower maintenance levels, the official replied, his floating bubble companions swirling anxiously around his head. Some kind of structural failure. They are saying the environmental systems are damaged. Beth made her way to the central information hub, where Coordinator Plynn was coordinating the response. His usually calm demeanor had been replaced by frantic worry. His fluffy exterior was standing on end, making him look twice his normal size. The cargo loaders malfunctioned, he explained to the gathered crowd. Containers collapsed and ruptured the coolant lines. The entire lower level is filled with aerosol coolant. It is not toxic, but visibility is nearly 0 and the temperature has dropped significantly. Are there injuries? Someone asked. No, thankfully. But several companion animals escaped during the evacuation. They fled into the maintenance tunnels before we could secure them. We have search teams, but the conditions make it almost impossible to locate small creatures in that maze. Beth saw the data pad in Plynn's trembling hands. On the screen was an image of Pip, his beloved companion. "Pip is down there?" Plin's voice cracked. "He was with me during my inspection rounds. When the containers fell, he panicked and ran. I tried to follow, but the coolant fog came too quickly. I could not see where he went." Other delegates began sharing similar stories. At least 7 companion creatures were missing somewhere in the dark, cold tunnels below. The festival atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by genuine distress. Beth stepped forward. "I can help." Every head turned toward her. Vren, who had been reviewing status reports, looked up with confusion. "Ambassador? How could you possibly help?" "Kodiak can find them. Dogs have an incredible sense of smell. They can track scents even in difficult conditions. We have used them for search and rescue on Earth for thousands of years." The suggestion was met with immediate resistance. A Draxian delegate spoke up, her crystalline voice sharp with fear. "You want to send that predator after our companions? It would tear them apart?" "No, he would not," Beth insisted. "That is what I have been trying to make you understand. Kodiak is trained for this. He can locate your animals and lead us to them safely." Friend shook his head. "Absolutely not. We cannot risk it." "Risk what?" Beth's frustration finally broke through her diplomatic composure. "Risk saving those creatures? Your search teams have found nothing in 2 hours. How long can those small animals survive in those conditions? How long before hypothermia or fear kills them?" The room fell silent. Plin looked down at the image of Pip, his entire body trembling. "Please," Beth said more softly, "let Kodiak help. I will take full responsibility. If he shows even the slightest aggression, you can remove him immediately. But give him a chance to do what he was bred to do. Not hunt, save." Plin looked at Vren. The counselor's expression was conflicted, but eventually he gave a slow nod. "Very well. But he will have a full security escort, and he will wear a monitoring collar. At the first sign of dangerous behavior, we will intervene." "Agreed," Beth said. 20 minutes later, Beth stood at the entrance to the maintenance tunnels with Kodiak at her side. The security team kept their distance, weapons ready but not aimed. The tunnel entrance exhaled clouds of white coolant fog that rolled across the floor like ghostly water. The temperature made Beth's breath visible, and she was grateful she had grabbed her jacket. Plin approached nervously, holding a small blanket that belonged to Pip. "This has his scent," he said, offering it to Beth while keeping his distance from Kodiak. Beth took the blanket and knelt beside her dog. "Kodiak, search." She held the fabric near his nose, letting him take in the scent. His entire posture changed instantly. His nose went to the ground, and his body shifted into working mode. This was what German shepherds had been bred for over generations. Not fighting, not killing, finding. She unclipped his leash and several security officers tensed, but Kodiak did not bolt or attack. He simply moved forward into the fog with purpose, his nose sweeping back and forth across the ground. Beth followed closely with the security team behind her. The tunnels were a maze of pipes, cables, and machinery. The coolant fog reduced visibility to barely 3 meters. Beth could hear the nervous breathing of the security officers and feel the cold seeping through her clothes. But Kodiak moved with confidence, following a trail only he could detect. After 10 minutes of walking, Kodiak suddenly stopped and lowered himself to the ground. His tail wagged slightly and he made a soft whining sound. Beth approached carefully and saw Pip huddled behind a coolant pipe, shivering and terrified. The small creature's eyes were wide with fear. "Found him," Beth called back. She expected Kodiak to stand and move away, but instead he crawled forward slowly, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. Pip pressed against the pipe, but he did not run. Kodiak extended his nose and gently touched the small creature, then looked back at Beth as if asking what to do next. Plin rushed forward, his fear of Kodiak forgotten in his relief. He scooped up Pip and held the small creature close, tears running down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." But Beth was already directing Kodiak forward. "Search," she commanded. There were 6 more animals to find, and the temperature was still dropping. Her dog moved deeper into the fog without hesitation. The real work was just beginning. The search continued through the cold tunnels, and with each successful rescue, the security team's attitude shifted. They had started the operation with weapons drawn and eyes fixed on Kodiak with suspicion. Now they watched with growing amazement as the dog worked with focused determination. The second creature they found was a quill and bubble companion that had drifted near a ventilation intake. The powerful suction was slowly pulling it closer to the spinning fans that would have torn it apart. Kodiak sensed the danger before anyone else did. He positioned his body between the intake and the creature, blocking the airflow while Beth carefully reached past him to grab the delicate being. The bubble companion pulsed with weak light, exhausted and cold but alive. How did he know to do that? One of the security officers asked, genuine wonder in his voice. Intelligence, Beth replied simply, cradling the rescued creature. Dogs understand cause and effect. They can assess situations and respond appropriately. That is why humans trust them. The third and fourth rescues came quickly after. A pair of Draxian crystalline beetles had hidden together in a gap between two pipes. Kodiak found them easily, but the space was too narrow for anyone to reach inside. The beetles were fragile, and forcing the pipes apart might crush them. The security team began discussing equipment they would need to bring, but Kodiak solved the problem himself. He lay down on the cold floor, pressed his body flat, and began whining softly. What is he doing? Plynn asked, still holding Pip close to his chest. Beth watched her dog and suddenly understood. He is calling them, making himself seem harmless. Watch. After a few moments, the beetles began to move toward Kodiak's soft sounds. They crawled slowly along the pipe until they reached the opening, where Beth could safely collect them. The entire rescue took less than 5 minutes compared to the hour it would have taken to bring cutting equipment. The fifth creature proved more challenging. A Urian companion similar to Pip had wedged itself deep into a service compartment, too frightened to respond to calls or coaxing. The small space was filled with electrical components that made reaching inside dangerous. Kodiak stuck his nose into the opening and sniffed, then pulled back and looked at Beth. Can you get it? She asked him. Kodiak's response was to very carefully place his head into the compartment. His movements were slow and deliberate. Everyone held their breath, watching as the predator moved closer to the helpless prey animal. Then Kodiak's tail started wagging. When he backed out, the Urian companion was clinging to his fur, having climbed onto his head to escape. The creature should have been terrified. Instead, it seemed to recognize that Kodiak was help, not harm. It released its grip when its owner rushed forward, and Kodiak accepted a grateful pat on the head from the Urian delegate without any reaction beyond a pleased expression. This is impossible, Vren muttered, watching through the video feed that the security team was transmitting. Predators do not behave this way. They do not help prey. They do not show restraint. Beth overheard through her communicator and felt compelled to respond. Counselor, you keep calling Kodiak a predator like that is all he is. But dogs are also pack animals. They are social creatures who understand cooperation. Humans are part of their pack, and we taught them that protecting others is what good pack members do. The sixth creature was a floating songbird from a world Beth had never heard of. It had exhausted itself trying to fly through the fog and had collapsed on a high catwalk. The structure was unstable, damaged by the falling containers. It would not support the weight of a full-grown human or any of the security personnel. Kodiak sat at the base of the catwalk and looked up, then back at Beth. She understood immediately. Stay, she commanded. Her dog remained perfectly still while she climbed the shaking structure alone. Every step made the metal groan, and halfway up a support bolt sheared off with a sharp crack. Beth froze, fear shooting through her. The catwalk tilted dangerously. Below her, Kodiak stood and began barking. Not aggressive barking, but urgent, worried barking. He was afraid for her. It is okay, boy, she called down, forcing calm into her voice. I am okay. She completed the climb, retrieved the songbird, and carefully made her way back down. When her feet touched solid ground, Kodiak pushed against her legs, his whole body wiggling with relief. The security officers saw something in that moment that changed everything. They saw the bond, the partnership, the love. The seventh and final creature was the hardest to find. Kodiak tracked it for nearly an hour through the twisting tunnels, his nose never losing the trail despite the cold and fog. When they finally located it, Beth understood why the search had taken so long. The creature had fallen through a gap in the floor grating and was trapped in a narrow space between levels. There was no way for anyone to reach it. The gap was too small for any of the species present. They would need specialized equipment, and by the time it arrived, the creature might not survive the cold. Beth looked at the gap, then at Kodiak, then back at the gap. No, she said out loud. I am not asking him to do that. Do what? Flynn asked. The gap is just barely wide enough for Kodiak. He could fit through and reach the creature. But if he gets stuck, if something goes wrong, I cannot get to him. Vren's voice came through her communicator. Ambassador, it is your decision. We will not ask you to risk your companion. Beth knelt beside Kodiak and looked into his eyes. He looked back with perfect trust. He would go if she asked. He would do anything for her because that was what dogs did for their humans. I am sorry, she whispered, scratching his ears. Search, Kodiak squeezed through the gap. Beth counted every second he was out of sight. She heard scraping sounds, then silence, then finally the soft whine that meant he had found something. When he emerged, moving backward carefully, the missing creature was gripped gently in his mouth. Not one tooth had broken its skin. All 7 animals had been found. All 7 were alive. And Kodiak stood in the middle of the tunnel, tongue out, tail wagging, waiting for Beth to tell him he was a good dog. She did, over and over, while tears ran down her face. News of the rescue spread through Station Harmony, faster than the coolant fog had filled the maintenance tunnels. By the time Beth emerged with Kodiak and the security team, a crowd had gathered in the upper levels. Delegates who had previously avoided her now pressed forward with questions. How had the dog tracked through such conditions? Why had he not harmed the vulnerable creatures? What kind of training produced such behavior? Beth answered patiently while Kodiak sat at her side, unbothered by the attention. Someone had brought him water and food, which he accepted gratefully. His fur was damp from the coolant fog, and his paws were dirty from the tunnels, but his tail never stopped wagging. He was happy because his human was happy and he had done good work. Flynn approached with Pip nestled safely in his carrier. The coordinator's earlier fear had been replaced by something Beth recognized as shame. Ambassador Carver, I owe you and your companion an enormous apology. I judged Kodiak based on what he looked like rather than who he is. That was wrong of me. Thank you for saying that, Beth replied. But I understand why you reacted that way. Kodiak is different from what you are used to. Fear of the unknown is natural. Perhaps, Flynn said, but wisdom means looking past that fear to see truth. Your companion risked himself to save creatures he had never met, from species he did not know. That speaks to character that I failed to recognize. More delegates came forward to express gratitude. The Quillen, whose bubble companion had nearly been destroyed, asked detailed questions about dog breeding and training. The Draxian wanted to know if Earth had other domesticated predators. Even some of the security officers who had started the mission with weapons ready now asked if they could pet Kodiak. Beth granted permission, showing them how to approach properly and where dogs like to be scratched. Kodiak accepted the attention with patient dignity, seeming to understand that this was part of his job too. Building bridges. Showing that different did not mean dangerous, Counselor Vren arrived and requested a private meeting. They moved to a quiet conference room while Kodiak waited outside with an officer who had volunteered to watch him. The change in the officer's attitude was remarkable. Where before he had monitored Kodiak like a threat, now he sat beside the dog and scratched his ears while talking to him in a gentle voice. Inside the room, Vren stood by the window overlooking the station. I have been thinking about what happened today, he began. About what it means. And what do you think it means? Beth asked. The Galactic Council has spent thousands of years building a civilization based on peace and order. We bred aggression out of our animals. We created laws to prevent violence. We take pride in how far we have evolved beyond our primitive ancestors. He turned to face her. But watching your Kodiak today, I wonder if we have gone too far in the other direction. Beth sat down, interested. How so? Our companion animals are gentle, yes, harmless, but they are also helpless. When danger came, they could only run and hide. They have no capacity to face challenges or protect themselves. We bred those abilities away because we saw them as violent. Vren paused, choosing his words carefully. But your species made a different choice. You did not remove the strength from your companions. You redirected it. That is exactly right, Beth said, feeling a surge of hope. We taught dogs to use their strength for protection instead of predation. Their intelligence for cooperation instead of hunting. They still have all their natural abilities, but they choose to use them for good. And that choice, Vren continued, that capacity to have power but to use it wisely, that is something our animals cannot do because we never gave them the option. We made them safe by making them weak. You made your companions safe by teaching them purpose. Beth thought about all the roles dogs filled on Earth. Guide dogs for the blind. Therapy dogs for the traumatized. Search and rescue dogs like Kodiak. Guard dogs who protected families. Strength without compassion is cruelty, she said. But compassion without strength cannot help when help is needed. Dogs give us both. Which raises an uncomfortable question, Vren admitted. If humans chose to bond with powerful creatures and teach them compassion, what does that say about humans themselves? The Council has been nervous about your species. Earth is classified as a death world. Humans evolved in conditions that would kill most of us. You are stronger, faster, more resilient than most intelligent species. We worried that might make you dangerous. Beth felt the weight of his words. Humanity's application to join the Galactic Council had been contentious. Many species had argued against it, citing Earth's violent history and harsh environment. And now? She asked quietly. Now I think we misunderstood, Vren said. Yes, humans are strong. Yes, you come from a world that forced you to be tough, but you used that strength to protect weaker things. You domesticated predators and taught them to be heroes. If humans can do that with animals, perhaps humans can do that with themselves. He walked to the door and opened it. Outside, Kodiak still sat with the security officer, who was showing him something on a data pad. The dog tilted his head, ears perked with interest, and the officer laughed at the reaction. I am going to formally request that the Council revise our guidelines about companion animals, Vren said. The measure of a companion should not be how harmless it is, but how strong the bond is between species. And I am going to recommend that we look at Earth's animal domestication programs as a model. Other species might benefit from learning what humans discovered thousands of years ago. That working together makes both sides stronger? Beth suggested. Precisely. Vren extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting that Beth had tried to use days before. She took it, surprised and touched. Welcome to the Galactic Council, Ambassador. I think humanity has much to teach us. They returned to the corridor, and Kodiak immediately stood when he saw Beth, tail wagging his whole body in greeting. The security officer stood too, smiling. He is remarkable, the officer said. May I ask, are all Earth dogs like this? They all have the potential to be, Beth replied. With training, patience, and love, yes. Then I hope someday I might visit Earth and meet more of them, the officer said. Beth looked down at Kodiak, who looked back at her with absolute devotion in his eyes, and she felt pride swell in her chest. Not just pride in her dog, but in her species. Humans had learned long ago that the best partnerships came not from dominating the weak, but from earning the trust of the strong. I think that can be arranged, she said. I think that can definitely be arranged. The final day of the Unity Festival arrived with a completely different atmosphere than it had begun. The observation room where Kodiak had been confined now stood empty, the door open. Instead, the German Shepherd walked freely through the station halls with Beth, greeting delegates who no longer flinched away. Children approached to pet him with their parents' permission, and Kodiak accepted each interaction with his characteristic patience. The closing ceremony took place in the Grand Assembly Hall, where representatives from 42 worlds gathered. Beth had been asked to sit in the front row with Kodiak beside her. She noticed that Pip was no longer in his carrier, but walking alongside Plyn, the small creature seeming bolder after his rescue experience. Coordinator Plyn stepped up to the speaking platform, and the hall fell silent. His voice carried clearly as he addressed the crowd. Friends and colleagues, this Unity Festival has been unlike any we have held before. It began with celebration and nearly ended in tragedy, but it also taught us something we desperately needed to learn. He paused, looking directly at Beth and Kodiak. We have prided ourselves on building a civilization free from violence. We bred our companion animals to be gentle and harmless, believing that safety came from removing all capacity for aggression. But 3 days ago, when our companions were in danger, they had no way to save themselves. They could only hide and wait for rescue. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This was not the typical closing speech full of platitudes about harmony and progress. Then a human arrived with her companion. Plyn continued. A creature that our security systems identified as an apex predator. A being designed by evolution to hunt and kill. We were frightened. We called it dangerous. We locked it away because we could not imagine that strength and gentleness could coexist. Kodiak's ears twitched at the attention. But he remained sitting calmly beside Beth, unbothered by being discussed. "We were wrong," Plynn said simply. Ambassador Carver's companion Kodiak demonstrated something we had forgotten in our pursuit of perfect peace. He showed us that true strength is not about the capacity to harm, but about the choice to help. He had every ability to hurt the creatures he rescued, yet he chose protection over predation. He risked his own safety to save beings he had never met. The coordinator reached down to pick up Pip, holding his companion close. When Pip was lost in those tunnels, cold and afraid, it was not a harmless, gentle creature who saved him. It was a predator who chose to be a hero instead. That is a lesson worth remembering. The hall erupted in applause. Delegates stood and the sound echoed off the high ceiling. Beth felt tears prick her eyes. Beside her, Kodiak's tail thumped against the floor, responding to the positive energy in the room even if he did not understand the words. Counselor Vren took the platform next. The Galactic Council will be implementing several changes based on what we learned this week. First, we will revise our guidelines about companion animals. The measure of a companion will no longer be how harmless it is, but how strong the bond is between species and how well that companion is trained and cared for. More applause, this time mixed with some uncertain murmurs from delegates who are not sure about this change. Second, Vren continued, we will be establishing a cultural exchange program with Earth to study their methods of animal domestication and training. Several species have already expressed interest in learning from human expertise. We believe this knowledge will benefit the entire galaxy. Beth had not expected that. A cultural exchange program meant humans would be teaching aliens. It meant Earth's methods would be recognized as valuable, not primitive or barbaric. It was more than she had hoped for when she arrived. And finally, Vren said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I want to address the concerns some species had about humanity joining the Council. Yes, Earth is a death world. Yes, humans evolved in harsh conditions that made them tough and resilient. But what we saw this week proves that strength shaped by compassion is not something to fear. It is something to celebrate. He gestured toward Beth and Kodiak. Humans could have used their abilities to dominate. Instead, they formed partnerships. They took powerful predators and taught them to be protectors. They took their own strength and used it to help others. That is precisely the kind of species we want in the Galactic Council. The applause this time was thunderous. Beth stood overwhelmed as delegates from across the galaxy expressed their approval. She had come to the festival hoping not to cause trouble. Instead, she had somehow changed the galaxy's perspective on her entire species. After the ceremony, delegates lined up to speak with Beth. The Quillen representative wanted to know if Earth dogs could be trained to work in zero-gravity environments. The Draxian asked about breeding programs and genetic diversity. A Urian official inquired about therapy animal programs for trauma survivors. Everyone had questions, and Beth answered them all with growing excitement. One delegate, a species Beth had not met before, approached with unusual intensity. My world is having problems with an invasive species that damages our crops, the alien explained. We have tried everything, but the creatures are too fast and too clever for our current methods. Could Earth dogs help with this? Beth thought about border collies, about rat terriers, about all the working dogs that had helped humans with similar problems for thousands of years. Yes, she said. I think they could. We would need to study your world's conditions and the specific invasive species, but dogs are incredibly adaptable. If there is a way to help, we will find it. As the festival wound down and delegates began departing for their home worlds, Beth found herself standing at the same observation window where Vren had looked out days before. The station rotated slowly, and she could see shuttles coming and going, carrying aliens back to their distant planets. Many of those aliens were now carrying new ideas about strength, partnership, and trust. Kodiak leaned against her leg, and she scratched his ears. You did good, boy, she whispered. You showed them who we really are. Plynn approached, Pip walking confidently beside him now. Ambassador, before you leave, I wanted to give you something. He held out a small medallion. It is the Festival Medal of Honor. We have never awarded it to a non-sentient being before, but the council voted unanimously. This is for Kodiak. Beth took the medallion, emotion thick in her throat. She knelt and fastened it to Kodiak's collar. The dog looked at her with his usual expression of patient love, having no idea what the medal meant but knowing it made his human happy. "We will see you again," Plynn said. "When the exchange program begins, I hope you will bring Kodiak. Many of us would like to learn from him." "We will be here," Beth promised. She left Station Harmony with Kodiak at her side, just as she had arrived. But everything was different now. The aliens no longer saw a predator on a leash. They saw a partner, a friend, a hero. And they saw humanity reflected in that partnership, understanding finally that the species who chose to befriend wolves instead of sheep, who valued strength paired with compassion, were exactly the kind of allies the galaxy needed. Behind them, the Unity Festival concluded with delegates returning home to tell stories about the human and her remarkable dog. The galaxy would never look at companion animals or at humans the same way again. And somewhere in the maintenance tunnels of Station Harmony, a small memorial plaque was installed, commemorating the day a predator became a protector and taught the galaxy what true strength really meant.